Hi, this is the Social Jello with Angelo show. My name's Angelo. I'm a social scientist, surfer, martial artist, and a whole lot of other things. Coming to you live from Kasai City, Japan, the Social Jello with Angelo show.
What's up, and welcome to another episode of Social Jello with Angelo podcast. I am here with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor and black belt Kailani Morehead. Did I fall off?
So bad.
I did. I did. All right, go ahead and say it, man. Say it right. Say it correct.
Kailani Morehead.
There you go. You heard it. I'm not gonna repeat it again so I don't butcher it again. So you saw the title of this. Is BJJ becoming Tae Kwon Do? You'll see memes out there, right? There's black belts and there's black belts. There's a meme. There is black belts and there is black belts. And it's pretty much, if you haven't seen it, it's a meme, and they show a bunch of there it is right here. Found it. I'm gonna share screen it. Boom. That was pretty quick. Let's see here. Share. Boom. Oh, I got some championship belts there in the background. Good job there, buddy. There are black belts and there are black belts, and it shows a bunch of BJJ guys, tough looking BJJ guys, and a bunch of kids and grandparents and families, mostly mothers, wearing Tae Kwon Do uniforms. I recognize those. All right, so what's going on here? Why would I even compare these two? So maybe some of you are already offended, already in the comments, arguing, saying no. Well, I'm looking at this. I talk about this show having psychological elements. I do have a master's in psychology, so I do look at martial arts communities as social subcultures, and with another weird layer of organizational structure. So why am I saying all this? Blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Well, when I started doing martial arts was around formally. When I walked into my first dojo, I started doing martial arts when I was 12. I'm 42. I started doing martial arts when I was 12. And I didn't walk into any dojos. I worked with people that trained, that were black belts in karate. Some of them did judo. Some of them did MMA. And we would just train in the parks, in garages. I did that for a while before I walked into my first dojo. I didn't walk into my first dojo until about the year 2000, maybe a little before that. Technically, I worked in my first Kwon when I was 16. That's a totally different story. Didn't last very long. I didn't like it. But I finally committed to something, and that ended up being Kajikembo. But that space was shared by a Tae Kwon Do school, and that was the year 2000. Why is this relevant? Well, I worked with Tae Kwon Do guys before the year 2000, and if you look at the history of Tae Kwon Do and the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's kind of interesting. People look at Tae Kwon Do as this ancient art, but in reality, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu started first, to be honest. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the development of it started in the 1930s, sometimes even earlier. Like if you look at the Wikipedia page, they'll say it was developed by Carlos Oswald and Gustavo Jr.
1925.
Yeah, there it is. Yep, he took the words right out of my mouth. 1925. But if you look at the history of Tae Kwon Do, it's a combat sport that was developed in the 1940s and 1950s by Korean martial artists. Now, this is not about the history of these two arts. Why is this relevant? Is because as these two arts kept developing, there was a sports side that was developing alongside with it. They were both martial arts that were developed for self-defense first. That's both of their goals are kind of aligned here. But then something funny happened in 2000. And that's when I first started talking about. In 2000, Tae Kwon Do became an Olympic sport. And you can find a Tae Kwon Do school. Back then, and even now, you can go into a city and drive a few blocks, and if you look at martial arts, you're going to find a Tae Kwon Do school. It's going to be the most readily available martial art that you're going to be able to find a place to train at. I don't know how popular it is now, but yeah, no, I could probably still confidently say that. It's one of the most easily found martial arts to train in. Whether it's effective or not, we're not going to go there yet, but it's readily available. I see something similar now happening in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Not as much, but it's happening. You can readily available in the United States. You can find Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in any major city, that's for sure. Now, why am I going here? So when I started doing Kajukembo, it's not that common of a martial art still. Sorry guys, I don't like Kajukembo guys, like, right? I'm sure half of you watching this podcast are like, what the fuck's Kajukembo? Maybe you're saying that right now. So look it up. It's Hawaiian martial art. At the end of this podcast, you'll see a little link that'll talk about that with UFC coach John Hackleman. I went to a Tae Kwon Do school because my instructor shared his dojo with a Tae Kwon Do school. So they had Kajukembo on some days, Tae Kwon Do on some other days. And he told me, hey, if you want to do some cross training, I have a deal with the Tae Kwon Do guys. You can jump into any of their classes for what you pay every month. I'm like, cool. Let me check it out. Let me check out this Tae Kwon Do thing. Because at that point, any Tae Kwon Do guys I met were us sparring in my garage, in my front yard at the park, those guys. And we had a whole different set of rules to how we sparred. It was very much, the reason I liked Kajukembo is because we didn't have a very big, broad set of rules. It was just, don't get hurt, because we're all teenagers. We don't want to explain to our parents why someone got injured. So we'd avoid injury, but our rule sets allowed anything. It looked like MMA. It was ground and pounds and submissions. We weren't very good at them, but submissions for what we could pick off, and then, her. The Tae Kwon Do school, the Tae Kwon Do guys were okay with that. And they always talked about how Tae Kwon Do was a very effective martial art. And they'd also complain about how in their dojos, they wish they can do more of the kind of sparring we were doing at the parks in the garages. And I didn't quite understand what they were talking about until I went to a Tae Kwon Do school, and they had this point system rules, like this point sparring thing, that you couldn't hit to the face, very limited contact, had to stop punches. There was this thing called a reverse punch. You had to have chamber punches to get points counted. There was a whole very intricate point system that I didn't fully understand. And long story short, I almost got kicked out of the class, because the instructor was very upset that I did a head kick. I did an inside crescent head kick off a lead leg. It was a move they just showed us that day that I would never use in any real fight. It was a roundhouse kick to the body to set up a head kick that they just showed us earlier in class. I did the exact same move they just showed us in class, and then he said that was excessive contact, and that if I was in a tournament, I'd be kicked out for excessive contact, because it was a yellow belt. I was a white belt. I kicked a yellow belt in the head. Either way. So how is this related to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? I don't know. Is this related to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? I'm going to stop my story right there and hand this over to, I don't want to butcher your name again. I'm going to hand this over to Kaulani.
Kaui for sure.
All right. What do you think?
So, like, I don't know the sports side of martial arts super well, because when I started martial arts, I was 3 years old. According to my parents, I was 3. I started in Kajukembo as well, so I never knew anything outside of like self-defense or fighting. Yeah, we did point sparring at times, but most of the time for us, it was all full contact sparring, even for kids. I mean, I literally grew up in Sijo's arms when I was a kid. So I was always kind of just embedded in my head. Everything is about fighting. Everything is about self-defense. So I didn't really learn about the sports side of things until I started getting into MMA. And then I started seeing what other martial arts were doing as far as like the Olympic sport stuff or point sparring, blah, blah, blah. Where jiu-jitsu, like your question of, is jiu-jitsu kind of becoming the same thing? When I started jiu-jitsu, I was 14, and I just remember it being what they call a pojada school or a fight school. The sports side, like tournaments, competitions were there, but everything was about fighting. We did the self-defense curriculums. We constantly rolled with what we call taparia, or slapping while we roll. We put the gloves on and roll with strikes. standing, the whole 9 yards. So I never really understood what all that meant until I got into the competition stuff as well and started competing myself. So yes, jiu-jitsu is kind of going down that route, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing if unless we forget about what the original roots are for. So that's what I would say is yes, it's becoming like that, but it's not a bad thing as long as we don't forget about the roots and we don't stop training the roots of it.
Okay. And so that being said, and you hear online, like even I think it was Hoist Gracie that was saying that sport jiu-jitsu is gravitating away from self-defense. Is not the same as the jiu-jitsu he practiced for the goal,
Sure.
for the original goal that he was practicing jiu-jitsu for. Can you break down what he meant by that?
Yeah. So I know you kind of mentioned it's not about the history of things, but I feel it's super important to know the history in order to know what we're kind of talking about. So with jiu-jitsu, we have to remember jiu-jitsu comes from Japanese jiu-jitsu or judo. At the time, it was synonymous. The two arts were synonymous, the two words. But going back, right? So the samurai were practicing jiu-jitsu, the joint locks, everything, basically unarmed combat. At that time period, Japan was wanting to become Europeanized, right? So Japanese jiu-jitsu was kind of frowned upon. It was looked at, the thugs were doing it, it was outdated, they didn't like it. So here comes Jigoro Kano, a very educated man who modified Japanese jiu-jitsu to suit the needs of what the population needed. He created judo, which was a heavy focus on throws, but at that time it was still very self-defense and fighting oriented. Actually, I was reading somewhere where Jigoro Kano himself was saying he didn't like pulling guard. He liked the throws. He was worried that the full, like, only grappling was going to lead to it becoming too much of a outside of self-defense, right? So he liked the throws. Judo comes to Japan, and Grandmaster Carlos Gracie Sr. was learning at the Maeda school, which, from what I understand, the Maeda school was still practicing traditional jiu-jitsu judo, which had all the self-defense stuff. It had all of that. If you look at the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu self-defense curriculum today, where did they learn that from, right? Like Grandmaster Elio says he never created anything new. He just modified. So all that stuff is coming from Japanese Jiu-Jitsu judo. In that time period, the Japanese actually came to Grandmaster Elio and his brothers and wanted them to side with judo, because at the time judo was becoming an Olympic sport, right? It was becoming very big and they were wanting to grow it more. The Gracies were making a big name for themselves in Brazil, and they wanted them to come under judo. They wanted to actually offer them black belts and carry the name. Maybe we'd be practicing Gracie judo. I don't know. But the Gracie brothers.
I'm going to stop right there just for anybody following it. And I know the reason I'm saying it's not a history podcast, because I know some of you people are really geeked out on the history. And if I mess up any of this history, I'm telling you right now, I'm getting it from Wikipedia. So and that's as trustworthy as Wikipedia can be. But just to pause that real quick, we're talking around 1964, because according to Wikipedia, the Summer Olympic Games introduced judo as an Olympic sport in 1964 in the games in Tokyo, Japan. This is correct.
For sure. So, but like, you got to remember how big judo was becoming in that time period. And we're talking anywhere from the 50s to the 60s, all that. But what I'm getting at here is the Gracie brothers strongly believed in what jiu-jitsu was originally for, was for fighting. But the Gracie brothers also believed that judo had a point where once you got the ippon, the fight was done. Where the Gracie's brother believed the fight was not done until there was a submission and somebody was either getting put to sleep, broken arm, or they were tapping, right? So where hoist comes into play, right? So this is carried on the Gracie family. Where hoist comes into play is in the late 90s, early 2000s, I believe, jiu-jitsu really, really started changing in the sport realm, right? It actually started taking off in the sport of jiu-jitsu in the 60s, but at this time, Grandmaster Elio took his red belt off in the 2000s and he put his Navy belt back on, which was the original belt system for the Gracie clan. And they said, this is no longer my jiu-jitsu. My jiu-jitsu is for self-defense. It's not a sport. So what Hoist is talking about is Hoist was learning the original curriculums in concepts and mindset that his father and his brothers were practicing, which was a martial art for self-defense. And what they were seeing at this time was the self-defense was being put on the back burner and the sports side was growing way faster than anything else.
And then just to quote Hoist in that interview, and if you look up, by the way, for any of you wondering, if you look up Hoist Gracie critiques BJJ academies for not teaching self-defense, a bunch of articles come up. You can see the video where he talks about it. But he says, quote, nobody enters the martial art because he wants to compete. No one puts a son to take up martial arts because he wants his son to win a championship. Parents want a child to learn how to defend himself. A woman goes into martial arts because she wants to learn to defend herself. I think that competitive jiu-jitsu today is already very distant from jiu-jitsu, perhaps more rooted by Helio Gracie, Hoist from those first generations to Hoist Erickson. So, because it ended up becoming very competitive and having rules, which ended up characterizing it as a sport to get points. And I'm paraphrasing here. Often the essence of self-defense is left behind in this modality. And again, this is what I talk about, like when I say about my shows about psychology, I think it's really interesting. I find it very interesting what the goals were and the social forces that pushed to become a sport. Fast forward now to 2024 to that conversation I had with you where I messaged you about that black belt that had a big fit. I'm a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, by the way, anybody watching. I'm also an MMA coach and a black belt in Kaji Kembo. In case you're wondering, I'm not the same kid that's still in a garage. Let me just put it that way. So either way, I was rolling with a black belt a few weeks ago. I was telling I wanted to call you Chad. Sorry. I was telling Kaolani this a few weeks ago. I sent him a message and I talked about this black belt that I was rolling with that had a big fit. Because for 4 weeks I've been trying to dial in what this guy's doing because he's a gi jiu-jitsu guy. And he kept getting me in lasso guard, which is not my specialty. I'll say it right now. Lasso guard, spider guard, things that are not my specialty. I learn them. I even teach them because I think if a student of mine wants to do a competition, wants to do a sport jiu-jitsu competition, I think it's important that they, even if they don't like it, a lot of students don't like it. In my experience, whenever I teach a student spider guard, they don't like it. They don't like how their fingers feel. They don't completely understand how to use it. It's not a very easy guard to use off the bat. It's got its benefits in sport jiu-jitsu, but then a lot of my guys do MMA and immediately they're like, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to use spider guard, let alone lasso guard. I can actually make a probably better argument for spider guard than I can lasso guard in MMA. Because I can't find it. I can't find it. Maybe you could explain that to me a little. Anyway, long story short, this guy's that's his specialty: spider guard and lasso guard. 4 weeks of trying to get out of that guard, those grips, is what I spent. I started giving him some opportunities because I feel like a stalemate just wasn't what I wanted. And he's a champ. He knows what he's doing. I'm not trying to criticize this guy at all. But eventually, when I finally do pass his guard and we start playing more, and it's not so much this like power dynamic where he's trying to beat me, because that's what he was trying to do when he came in. He was very, very what's the word I'm looking for? Clear about that. Because we asked him, hey, are you here? Because he's an instructor. Are you here to do you want to trade some knowledge? And he said, no, I'm here as a jiu-jitsu player to play jiu-jitsu. Those were his words. Okay, so he only sparred. He didn't do any coaching whatsoever. He just came in. He wanted to just come in to train and practice. He was clear about it, so that's cool. So we're rolling. And when I finally get past his guard, where we're playing, he gets me in a leg lock. So I'm like, all right. He's okay with leg locks, which I'm not sure, because some gi guys avoid leg locks like the plague. Some of them are okay with it. So I figured he's okay with leg locks. Since he did a leg lock on me, I guess now leg locks are open. That was my translation of what happened. So fast forward to the message I sent you and the one I'm telling you guys about 2 weeks ago. I caught him in a leg lock. And I think I mentioned this on the show last week too. But either way, he had a big fit, said it was reaping, said that the position I was in wasn't the correct position, said that it was dangerous. I let it go. He never tapped. He started rolling. The second I had the actual hold, I originally started with the IBJJF rules. We're talking about rules, sport jiu-jitsu, and I was not reaping in the beginning. My legs weren't crossing the center line, as they say. It was on the same side. So we weren't, when I started the heel hook, which I originally started, and it was a heel hook, it was on the right side. He started spinning around. I let it go because I didn't want anyone to get hurt. And I reestablished position. And now my legs were crossed across the axis. And I went to a toe hold. I went to an inside toe hold, an outside toe hold, and the outside toe hold let go. When we were done with the match, he was really, really, really upset, saying that my jiu-jitsu is dangerous. Someone's going to get hurt. And I said, well, I would never do this to a white belt. You're a black belt. I figured if we're playing jiu-jitsu and I let it go, we should be okay. And if we tap, we should be fine. And he said, well, still, that's against the rules. You didn't know that's against the rules, and maybe you need to study the rules more. And I was like, I'll tell you right now that the certificate I have is assistant instructor. I'm still learning all the rules. I'll give you that, but I don't see what the big deal was. And then, and then he said, I don't play. And I said, well, what about the no-gi jiu-jitsu rules that say you can do that? And he said, I don't play no-gi jiu-jitsu. And I'm like, okay, sounds good. What are your thoughts on all that?
I think that's lame. To be honest with you, like I just hearing the story, I think it's an ego trip. I think it's a somebody that competes or has a competitive mindset that lost and needed an excuse to help himself feel better. I don't know. I wasn't there, so I can't say just by hearing your side of the story. There's this weird thing in all martial arts that is very egotistical, right? Where my philosophy in martial arts is self-growth and helping others grow. I mean, that's what an instructor is supposed to be. I think the whole, like, if you look at a jiu-jitsu black belt, originally that red bar that I wear with professor bars on my belt, you're a teacher. You're not a competitor, right? If you want to compete, you wear the black belt with a white bar. So when you get your black belt, like you're supposed to teach, right? Unless you just want to compete. So there's real big ego in all that. I think jiu-jitsu today goes too much off of the IBJJF and the rules and all that good stuff. And I don't really care. I think a choke is a choke, a footlock's a footlock, an armbar's an armbar, wrist locks are wrist locks. If they work, they work. There's no such thing as a cheap thing or an illegal thing. If it worked, tap, suck it up. You learned, and say good job to the other person and keep going happily. So hearing that story, it really puts me off, because I mean, I deal with it too. There's too much ego involved and too much watered down martial art, especially in the jiu-jitsu community, right? When we spar, like my students spar in between 6 to 8 months. That's when they start sparring. And right out the gate, they're learning how to spar with punches. They're learning how to do takedowns while they're sparring. And for us, we don't teach leg locks until you're a blue belt, just for safety purposes and to teach a strong foundation. But the dude's a black belt, you're a brown belt. Like you have all the right in the world to leg lock people. And if it was a mutual agreement, then to me, ego should be gone out of that.
And then just to wrap up the story, I apologize. I didn't fight. Look, I was also, I don't know, maybe this is my thing. And my student was like, you're being too nice. My students were there. Oh yeah. My students were all there watching this just play out. And there was a lot of questions when that guy left. They had a lot of questions for me of like, what's going on? because I don't like you. A lot of the guys aren't there for sport jiu-jitsu. They're there for MMA or for self-defense, primarily self-defense. A lot of military and police officers. So
Yeah.
I had to have a conversation with them about sport jiu-jitsu, and I told the guys, I made an announcement next week. Really think about what your goals are, because I have my jiu-jitsu program separate from my self-defense program, separate from my no-gi program for that reason. And I explained this is why. Hey guys, this is exactly why I separate these three things. And I tell you what I tell you. And whenever I tell you guys stuff like, hey, I'm going to show you this technique right now, but remember this, do not do this. do not go to some other academy and do this next move.
Yeah.
Because they're not gonna like it. They're gonna say you're being too aggressive. This is what they're gonna tell you is not okay with it. They're gonna say that you're putting too much pressure on the neck here, too much pressure there. Because it's subtle things that I've been yelled at here in Japan. I haven't rolled enough outside of Japan to know what's happening. I've rolled with a few Americans, and I've never had any problems out here. But in Japan, in particular, they're very gentle about and technical about the way they do their jiu-jitsu. So they'll complain about stuff like if you put too much pressure on someone's neck while doing a pass, like not even like a neck crank, just having a certain grip and putting a little too much pressure on someone, they'll complain about that stuff. So I'm always telling the guys the same stuff. Hey, I allow this here, but be careful when you go out there. I always tell the guys, I'd rather have someone say during a practice session while you're visiting a school that you were too nice than get kicked out for saying that you were being a dick or hurting someone. So I'd rather have that. I always tell them that. So like
our number one priority is safety for the students and for visitors. That's the number one priority is safety. But like to tie it back in, it's when the sport side and the rules were created, it's gonna happen. Competitors are going to try to win at whatever means necessary. So when you look at now, jiu-jitsu is not in the Olympics yet, but when you look at taekwondo or judo or sport jiu-jitsu in the competitions, people are going to win by whatever means necessary. In meaning they will try to rack up points without ever wanting to go for a submission. They will try to do little sneaky things to win. They will do what's called stalling, which I actually believe in, but they will stall and wait for the clock, and then they'll try to earn a point right at the last couple seconds to win. And that's whether people think that's right or wrong, the person still wins. But this is where we really, really start going on different paths when it comes to the topic, right? Is jiu-jitsu becoming taekwondo? And it is, but it isn't, right? Like I mentioned earlier, it's good that jiu-jitsu is being modified. Jiu-jitsu is constantly growing because it's beautiful and it's fun to do, right? But if you really look at jiu-jitsu, and I'm just going to use the old school Gracie guys, for instance. If you look at old school Gracie schools, their style hasn't changed, right? Like nothing has really changed about them. And a lot of people would say it's very outdated. Like myself, that's the way I roll and the way I train and the way I teach. And then you look at the modern side of jiu-jitsu and it is very innovative. It's very beautiful. But the reason why it's innovative and it's beautiful is because there's no striking involved and there's rules involved, right? Now, yes, you don't want to break your partner's neck learning a neck crank. I get it. But what I'm getting at here is when you can get punched in the face, everything changes. So I really like watching combat jiu-jitsu because it adds just a little element of realism where you can't do certain things because you're going to get TKO'd by an open palm slap. If you look at Taekwondo, if you look at old footage, it looks very beautiful. Their kicks look very effective. They're keeping their range very nice. Where when you look at an Olympic match, it looks like they're kind of doing very different stuff. And that all comes down to the rule set and winning according to that rule set or trying not to lose according to that rule set. It's just like football, man. If you're playing football, there's a rule set you have to stick to. And the last time I checked, we're doing martial arts. So I choose to go with the path of fighting and self-defense. So I try to stay, my competitors fight. I have professional fighters, professional jiu-jitsu competitors, and it's beautiful. And we even practice the sport jiu-jitsu stuff here after you have a strong foundation.
And again, to do a callback, when I had that happen, it gave me a flashback to the beginning of what I said in the podcast, to that yellow belt that I kicked and the instructor that reprimanded me. Because what you just said, we're doing Tae Kwon Do. Now, the only difference I can arguably say, and I give the Tae Kwon Do instructor credit to keeping people safe, is that I was a white belt back then. So I will give him credit saying, hey, I was inexperienced. He has to go off the fact that I'm a white belt and he's trying to keep his students safe. And according to his perspective, I kicked that kid too hard. We were both kids, but I kicked one of his students too hard in the head from a roundhouse kick to a crescent kick. But it still brought back like this interpretation, what you just said about understanding what the rules are, my understanding of the rules, trying to follow the rules, and then thinking I'm following the rules and then being told that, no, according to these rules, what you did was wrong. But if we took all those rules away and went back to what you just said, to self-defense, what I did worked. So that's what it really comes down to. If I would have, and I didn't try to kick that kid, he didn't get knocked out, there was no blood. If I really did try to kick that kid in the head full force, he would have been knocked out. If I would have not let go of that toe hold, that guy would have ended up in the hospital with a popped knee, and that's why he was so upset about everything. So again, back to like, the rules are there for our safety, but then when we start looking at why we do what we do in the first place, it's a balance. And that's why I did the podcast. It's not, I'm not trying to knock, for as much as people shit on Tae Kwon Do. I'll say this right now. For as much as they shit on it, hey, I just said you can find readily available a Tae Kwon Do place in just about every city, not even major city. Every little town has a Tae Kwon Do school in it. So if you're some kid who's watching UFC and you want to do MMA, you most likely are going to have a hard time finding a great academy or even a good BJJ academy in your little rural area. You most likely will find a Tae Kwon Do school to get you started. And there's nothing wrong with this per se, but
I think Tae Kwon Do is a very effective martial art. It's all in how you train your martial art. Now I'm going to play the devil's advocate here a little bit because I like to do that. The people that train martial arts today, you are going to go with what your instructor says or what kind of content you're taking in. Okay. So people today are so disconnected from history or from what was going on previously that they just assume that this is what it is, right? So I have it happen all the time in jiu-jitsu. I have it happen all the time in kajikembo and Muay Thai, the whole 9 yards. People will come in that have previous experience in a sport jiu-jitsu mindset where they're learning how to do jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu for a competitive tournament. They think that's what jiu-jitsu is, right? So when they get punched in the face or they get, let's just say, not saying you, but maybe I slap on a very, very sloppy heel hook that was wrong in tournament standards, they're gonna immediately think to themselves, that's wrong, right? Or for instance, when I roll with people from sport jiu-jitsu and I slap them in the face very kindly, just a gentle braise, they look at me and they're like, what was that? And I go, well, how are you going to defend that? And they have no idea. Well, that's illegal, right? And it's just as simple, me just touching them in the face, right? Just going, hey, how do you do that? And there's zero mindset to it, but it's because it's how you train the martial art, right? It's how you train whatever you're training. So very often when we have people come in and join our school that have prior experience in other martial arts, in sport jiu-jitsu, when they have the experience, they're experienced grapplers, they've already sparred, we will do that with them. We'll gently touch them in the face and we'll say, hey, you're open to these things. But because of the mindset and because of the complete lack of I'm not going to say lack of knowledge, but the lack of understanding, right? You don't know what you don't know. You know what I'm saying? So it all comes down to, you have to do your research and not just assume that's what it is. I mean, I've sparred with Taekwondo black belts that have kicked me in the head 20 times before I knew what was happening. But it was because they trained their art effectively and for fighting, not for the sport context.
Yeah, and a lot of MMA fighters have backgrounds in Taekwondo. As a kid, they did
Yeah.
Taekwondo, and then they found BJJ. They just kept evolving as a martial artist. So, and I'm not a stylist, so that's why I don't necessarily completely shit on an art per se. I will go after a philosophy, but
Sure.
but that's a different story. So how about you
Yeah.
guys? You now, listeners, you've been listening to us riff on this topic for about 30 or more minutes. What are your thoughts on this? Jump in the comments. What do you think? What do you think about this? Do you think BJJ is becoming the new Taekwondo? What is Taekwondo to you? Go in the comments, have a conversation. Try to keep it friendly. I will say that. Try to keep it friendly if you can. But yeah, we want to hear your thoughts on it, and I do reply to comments as long as, even when they're hostile, I still respond to them. But the less hostile, the more friendly you are, the friendlier I will respond. If you're very hostile, the most you're going to get from me is a thanks for watching the show. But if you want to engage, I am open to talk to you in the comments. You can find your, I don't have your website, man. Kaulani, do I have a website for you? No.
Origin Combatives.
Origin Combatives. Okay.
Yep.
So if you here we go. Let's do this together, folks. Share. Origin Combatives.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you on the top?
Yep, that's us.
There it is. Origin Combatives. It's the first place that comes up. Coming out of Idaho. So if you're in the Idaho area, you want to train, hit it up, click on the link, and you can learn more about what's going on at the school. Anything else you want to add before you go?
Yeah, and this is the thing, right? Is, again, there's nothing wrong with doing whatever martial art you're doing, as long as you're having fun, right? If you're having fun and it's growing you as a person, then that's awesome. Good for you, right? With these conversations, I have a hard time, I have a hard time because I'm not one to want to play ego sizing contest by any means. I just want to train and I want to get better and I want to be the best martial artist I can be for my reasons. But if you want to do sport jujitsu, if you think it's very effective, good for you. I think you should keep doing it. If you want to learn the other side, it's just about knowledge in the whole aspect of martial arts, not just the one trail you pick, right? If you choose that trail, that's awesome, but know that there's other trails and know the history of things. Know the history of things. And I think a lot of people today all want to have an ego and they want to say we're better than them or this is better than this. And that's just simply not the truth. Martial arts is there for self-growth. It's not there for egos. It was originally for combat, right? So if you're doing something and it's effective for you, then great for you. So is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu becoming like Tae Kwon Do? Yes, it is, but it's good that it is, so long as we are making sure that we keep the roots of Jiu-Jitsu alive and practice what it was originally intended for.
And there it is. And even, oh yeah, and just to wrap up the story with that guy, he's still at my school. He's still coming to class. So yeah, if you put that stuff to side, even if you're dealing with someone who is coming from a different mindset, and that's what I told all my students too, he's coming from a different mindset. He's a gi jiu-jitsu specialist. Just be clear. The biggest mistake I made was not being clear on the rules. That's the mistake I made. I'll own that. I should have said that. I should have asked him, hey, are you okay with heel hooks? Are you okay with toe holds? It's a pretty easy conversation. So if you're on the mat and you want to make sure you don't look like an asshole, because honestly, his perspective, I'm the asshole. maybe you all heard the story here. Maybe you took my story, you took his side. From his perspective, I was the asshole. So all of this could be really cleared up real quick. Is when you're on the mat, to clear up what rules you're sparring in, clear up what you're doing, and try not to let the mistake or whatever perspective be the reason that you stop rolling. Because that's, like you said, at the end of the day, we're just having fun, right? And it won't be fun if you're doing whatever you're doing and you don't clear up what rules you're engaging with. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for checking out another episode of Social Jello with Angelo podcast. Thank you to Kailani.
There you go.
Morehead. Thank you for coming out and sharing your perspective on this topic. One of these episodes once a week. Catch you all next time.